Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to a realm where reality intertwines with the inexplicable, where the boundaries of reason dissolve into the shadows of uncertainty. Welcome to the political twilight zone. I am your guide through this enigmatic labyrinth, where politics and power take on life of their own. In this dimension, the threads of truth weave a tapestry of intrigue, challenging our perception of the world we thought we knew. In this world, nothing is as it seems, and the truth lies buried beneath layers of deceit. Prepare to venture where reason meets the unexplained, and where the unexplained might just be the ultimate truth.
All right, everybody. Hope you're having a good Memorial Day. I do that every time. Labor Day weekend. It's nice weather, certain places. Where I'm at, it's not too bad. Does it seem to you, this is going to be a strange observation, does it seem to you like we have too many holidays? I'm not complaining about this one. I'm just saying the way we've got a few that just seem to pop up at random times, and even though a lot of people get the day off, it just kind of screws up the schedule. It kind of makes more work for you before and after the holiday. I mean, we got let's see. We got some new ones. Juneteenth. Yeah, I got the Juneteenth holiday. That it's important to some people to know what it is, but kind of hard for me to see it as a national holiday. But we got it. And, of course, we have Martin Luther King Day in January. And then we have, let's see, here's the thing that I don't understand, is we've collapsed all of the presidents into President's Day. In the past, you'd have, Washington's birthday. You'd commemorate certain things. Now, one of the things about collapsing all the presidents into one day is it seems like, well, all of them together aren't as important as some of these other days. I don't think that's true. Also, I'm not so sure I want to celebrate some of these presidents. I would like to delineate exactly what presidents we're talking about. I'm not particularly interested in celebrating Woodrow Wilson, just as an example. Why would I want to do that? I'm not entirely happy with looking at, let's say, FDR gives me a little bit of a run, but he's got the wartime president. He had Jimmy Carter. Right? What about Buchanan? Yeah, these guys, are we really supposed to be celebrating them? I mean, I thought we kind of looked for achievement in people we celebrate. I mean, I know that's an old-fashioned thing now. Achievement means nothing. Of course, we have to have equity in result. Equal result. That's what equity is. And so, however you get to that, and Lord knows, there's a lot of ways to get to that involve pretty much taking something from someone else and giving it to another person. But however you get to that, I guess that's what we're doing. What I'd like to think about today, I was going to ask everybody, take out a little piece of paper, but obviously you don't want to take it out if you're driving, if you're working in the garage or something like that, but just mentally. And write down, in your mind or whatever, what advantages you believe you now have by being a citizen of the United States versus someone that just wandered across the border of California and Mexico and decided to plop themselves down in Orange County. Just what's your advantage over those folks? It's tough, isn't it? I mean, it's especially tough if you listen to the news. And it's even worse if you're in California, where they're busily trying to get all of the local elections to not require any ID and let everybody vote in them. My question is, isn't this just kind of the crazy idea for voter fraud? I mean, not even just from one side or the other. How do you identify who people are? Does just the fact that they show up means that they can vote? Do they give you a name and you check it off and then they can't vote someplace else? And how do you know the name they gave you here isn't a different name than they give someone else, 6 blocks away at another polling station? Or, Lord forbid, polling station, but just make out a ballot, right? How do you know any of that? Well, you don't. And since you don't know any of that, it's very easy to say that we don't have any evidence of any election problems out here. Because if you destroy all of the ways to determine them, then there isn't any way to find them. It's sort of like somebody seeing a body laying in the street, but nobody calls anybody. Cops don't come, coroner doesn't come, nothing. Maybe somebody drags him off, who knows. But nobody investigates it. Did he just drop dead? Get hit by a meteor? Is it a homicide? Don't know. And there's no way to know. So, is that going to be a statistic of maybe crime? Don't know. Because I'm not checking to see if it is. This is what happens with these voter rules. What they're really doing is saying, I'm not going to check. And since I don't check, I don't have any statistics. Since I don't have any statistics, I'm going to say that there isn't anything. Man, what a racket. That's where we're at right now. I'm really having a difficult time deciding how someone who's merely a resident and an illegal resident, or, improper, let's not call them illegal. They are an undocumented, improper resident in the country, gets all of this stuff. Now, if you're in California, they're trying to give you $25,000 towards purchasing a home and some loans up from that. It's the craziest thing anybody's ever heard in the history of civilization. Not just this goofy country, but civilization. It is a rapid decline into oblivion because you're erasing all of the things that make a nation state exist. Borders, the difference between citizens and people who are just passing through. Isn't that pretty much what a nation makes up? And also, it seems to me that a lot of the folks that come in, if they're not properly processed, get a lot of the benefits, but they don't really have any responsibilities. Not the same as we do. Because we know who we are. The government knows who we are. They wonder where our taxes are. What happened with our tax money this year, mister? If you just kind of wander in the country with, I don't know, from Croatia, and you just make up a name, and then, I don't know, hey, maybe in a couple of months you make up another name. Government doesn't know who you is. See, that's that new grammar, by the way. Don't know who you is. That's the new grammar. And that's pretty dangerous. If you're trying to find somebody out there who is a criminal, for instance, and you have some vague idea of their identity, how are you going to find them if there's no way to confirm that identity? If they can just walk in pretty much every place, not provide any identification, how are you going to put your dragnet out? Now, I suppose, as we move into the robot overlord portion of our country, we will have facial recognition and things like that to track people everywhere. I mean, I don't see how they don't implement that. That's just way too much of a fun thing for the government to want to do. But really, I mean, the whole thing, when you stop and think about it, the whole idea of people becoming anonymous, certain people becoming anonymous. If you wanted to become anonymous as a citizen here, you'd have a heck of a time. There are records about you everywhere. You have all kinds of things to identify you. Not at the polling stations, but in general. If you didn't come in the country illegally, if you just showed up here, not so fast. Just think about that. You're a ghost. And you can change things as you wish. There was a trucking accident, a terrible trucking accident this week, where the person driving the semi-truck trailer, and I can't remember what state it was in, was, and I think 2 people were killed. The truck driver was an undocumented, resident, and on top of which is, he didn't have a driver's license. Now, they said no operator's license when I read the story, so I assume that means no driver's license at all, much less a commercial vehicle driver's license. He'd also been deported, I think, like 11 times since 2006. And here he is again, driving a truck. Now, do you see how that happens? If you just never identify anybody conclusively in your system, your society, who they are, there's no way to track them. If you allow them to tell you who they are at any given time, That's just not going to work, is it? It's an interesting thing we've got ourselves into. Be right back. Okay, everybody, we'll leave off from trying to calculate all of the many differences and benefits you get from being a citizen over somebody that's just wandered into the country. I believe that you can write them on a Post-it note, and that's assuming you can come up with one. Nevertheless, let's go to sort of a connected idea here. That is the Saving the Economy by Kamala Harris. Yeah. That's where we're headed, it seems like. She's got a plan. Won't tell anybody what it is, except in very vague ways. And we do know a few things for certain. If you follow the mainstream media, one, she's never met Joe Biden. Had no idea who he is. Somebody out there who does something they don't know where. Can't figure it out. Where is he? Don't know. Okay, there's that. And then the fact that everything can be made better by the vibe, the joy. For those, remember from the 90s and early 2000s cartoons of Ren and Stimpy, they had the Happy, Happy, Joy, Joy song. This is pretty much what they figure is going to fix everything. That seems a little suspicious. And then the other thing that we know, and this is let's take something from Kamala. Let me be perfectly clear here. Let me be clear here. From the very beginning, I have said things that I did not mean, and said things now that apparently I don't mean. And I want you to still find in that mess things you agree with and think that's what I'm going to do. Yeah, we know that's going to happen. Now, one of the things she wants to do, she has mentioned this. You know all this gouging that's going on? Yeah, that's right. These grocery stores out there that are making 1.6% on the average across their goods, yeah, they're gouging. And what you discover is that if you need wage and price controls. Now, this thing about price controls, there is no price controls unless you control wages too. It comes as a package. Always has. You got to put a lid on wages going up and the same lid on prices going up. What does that do? Well, it brings everything to a halt as far as rising right now, but it creates enormous turbulence in the economic system. Will it cure the price of goods going up? No, because they're going to go up sooner or later anyway. They're just going to jump up faster when they get around this stuff. And or it's going to create a huge black market. Or all sorts of things that have to do with getting around that system. Happens all the time. And if you want to see how this works very well, you can just look at Venezuela, where they put a series of wage and price controls to try and control their crazy economy and inflation. And each iteration of this made everything worse, until they got to the point where they didn't have any food in some of the cities. That's getting down there pretty good. But you don't take my word for it. I thought we'd spend a minute talking, listening to the great economist Milton Friedman, who's got a good discussion of this. Now, the first voice you're going to hear is President Nixon, who kicked this ball off. Don't forget, this got kicked off by President Nixon, then tried to carry through Gerald Ford. For those of you who can remember, he used to wear a little pin that said, "Win, whip inflation now." Yeah, remember that? And it was bad. But then, under Jimmy Carter, it got a lot worse. The heat got really turned up. And the only thing that saved us was Ronald Wilson Reagan step in. There was some very distasteful medicine. And then we were finally on the right track again. But here's, we'll listen to Nixon and Milton Friedman explaining this.
I am today ordering a freeze on all prices and wages throughout the United States for a period of 90 days.
Many a political leader has been tempted to turn to wage and price controls, despite their repeated failure in practice. On this subject, they never seem to learn. But some lessons may be learned. That happened to British Prime Minister James Callaghan, who finally discovered that a very different economic myth was wrong. He told the Labor Party conference about it in 1976.
We used to think that you could spend your way out of a recession and increase employment by cutting taxes and boosting government spending. I tell you in all candor that that option no longer exists. It only worked on each occasion since the war by injecting a bigger dose of inflation into the economy, followed by a higher level of unemployment as the next step. That's the history.
And the whole problem is made far worse by the false cures which government adopts, particularly wage and price controls. Wage and price controls, far from being a cure for inflation, only make inflation worse.
It is a device that governments have repeatedly resorted to try to cover up the effects of their own policies. It is offered as a cure for inflation. It is not a cure for inflation. It has never been a cure for inflation. It is an alleged cure that is far worse than the disease, because its effect is to repress the symptoms, to repress the consequences of the more basic force. I always say that if you want to analyze wage and price control, the simplest analogy that brings it home is to think of a kettle on your stove in which there's water, and the water is boiling. It's got a cover on it, and the boiling water is threatening to throw the cover off. Now, obvious, sensible thing to do is to turn down the heat under the kettle. Another thing you can do is to take a brick and put it on top of the kettle, and at the same time turn up the heat. That is precisely what President Nixon did in 1971, when he simultaneously put a brick on top of the kettle by freezing prices and wages, and at the same time launched on a more expansive monetary and fiscal policy which turned up the heat under the kettle. And what happened? The lid of the kettle blew up. You held it down for a little while, and then you had a 12%, 13% inflation. That has been the experience every time, not simply over the last 20, 30 years, but for 2,000 years. Emperor Diocletian tried the same thing in Rome 2,000 years ago with identically the same results. So I have nothing but a negative opinion about wage and price controls.
Now, you would think we could learn from others rather than have to repeat mistakes.
Apparently nobody can learn from history. The government is too big. It's too intrusive. It restricts what we can do. It's becoming our master instead of our servant, and we've got to react against it and cut it down to size.
Okay. Now, when I was looking around to do a little research on wage and price controls, I came across that. I keep a lot of these things from Milton Friedman and Thomas Sowell and people like that. And I thought, well, rather than just crib notes from that, I can't begin to put it any better than he does. I mean, it's exactly like that. Injections of spending, particularly borrowed money and spending, on the part of a government, turns up the heat on an economy. And if there's no place for that to go, no increased production and sales and things like that, where the economy can blow that off in a profitable and meaningful way, it just keeps boiling. And when you see that mistake and you think, oh, I should back off on what I'm doing with injecting money in various ways in the economy that's not tied in any way to productivity. But that never happens. Oh, seldom happens. Let's put it that way. It's happened with a few presidents, a couple of administrations. Ronald Reagan being the most obvious one. Calvin Coolidge knew what he was doing, too, by the way. So what do you do? Well, you can't turn down the kettle. You can't quit pouring money in, because you know what will happen? You'll not be able to buy votes. Because you've built your whole castle that you are on the liberal government on the idea of buying votes. You just have really two approaches. Break everybody up into little subcultures that are suspicious and angry at each other, and then pick the ones out that you can funnel benefits to that will vote for you. I mean, this is something even Kamala can figure out. People have figured it out for a really long time. One of the interesting things about the United States is how this came about Because for a while in the United States, and it was kind of true simply because of manipulation of the system, but people thought in the 20s, 30s, that if you appealed to the rich people, the business owners, those kinds of folks, then, you got some money, and that would help your campaign, and you're more likely to win. People trotted along with that idea for a while until they realized that that kind of money's nothing. Government's got a lot more money. And look, these guys we're trying to get money from, it's great if they want to do it, and we're happy to, slide them some prizes down the road if they want to give us some money up front. But here's the thing. They only got one vote. That's a few votes. On the other hand, the people that receive money, people that you can distribute money to, now there's a lot of votes. And they're cheaper. And you can do that, and you can do that either with the money other people give you, or taking that money to give you, or just printing it. That's the point. All right, let's jet back to some of the things we were talking about. Thanks, everybody. By the way, I don't think I ever said this, but this is Rick Wagner. I'm getting on the Rick Wagner Show on KNZZ, KGLN. We're at 1100 and 92.7, 980 and 101.3, the internet, podcasting, and my hope is that this broadcast will go out into space, and hundreds of years from now, a lost civilization across the stars may receive it and think, maybe we should think about those ideas. That's my dream. Anyway, speaking of dreams, let's talk a little bit about the fact that Kamala Harris, and remember, these are national events, but they're not national anymore. That's what I say all the time. We used to talk about local events and national events like they were completely separate. In today's world, they don't seem to be at all. Especially on the progressive side. The progressive person who's running for city council or whatever might pass for the same kind of local government in your area has the same agenda, the same ideas, the same solutions for everything that the national politicians that are progressives have. They're no different. No matter how wacky it is in general, and how even wackier it is to try and apply it to a local situation from time to time, they will not admit it. This is kind of a new phenomenon. This has just come about, really, as hard as hitting as it is, it's really just come about the last 10 years. But there is no wavering. There is no stepping off that progressive train. No, sir. If you do, you go flying off into who knows what, right? So, whoops, we got a phone going off in here. And now, we're trying to figure out, what does that mean? I mean, does it mean for us? Because it feels like government has become top-down, doesn't it? Because local ideas don't really seem to make any difference anymore. If you have ideas about, I don't know, economics, your own roads, stuff like that, what's going to happen? Well, they're not as important as the national ideas. This is what's happening on the left. So, are you getting any local input on things? Yeah. Very little. If you're trying to talk to progressives who want to be, on some council, a committee, a commission, a this or that, if they are on the left, they're effective because they're a one-trick pony. Now, they perform one trick and then go to the next arena and form a different trick, but it's all the same tricks. So you're not getting anything different. And discussing things as purely local is getting less and less effective. Now, that didn't used to be the way it was. The whole idea about the country is that it's supposed to flow up, right? The will of the people. Well, if you don't have any choices, if everybody says it's all the same thing, and it doesn't matter if you're living in a town in McKenzie, Tennessee, or Leadville, Colorado, if the progressive that's running for that job has the exact same mindset and the same solutions to any problems, how is it possible that the government can come up from the people. No. It's being imposed upon the people. It's a gradual thing. And you have to have a lot of help to do it that way. The biggest help you have to get is by people that are supposed to tell you what's going on. And in a country that's quite large, like our own, we have to rely on some forms of communication. Used to be newspapers. They were terrible, but you could kind of sort through which ones you wanted to read. You know, they were a Democrat newspaper, Republican newspaper, somebody that had sort of, maybe a personality disorder newspaper, whatever. You kind of figure it out. You had a choice of a selection out there, and you could kind of see what matched up to you and so forth. Well, that started dying out. And now you don't have that. And because we can't figure out on our own what disaster is happening in California without going out to California, we have to rely on what? The news. And are the news on, your side? I don't think so. Because over time, they've been captured by the left. And part of it's just because of the educational system. The educational system encourages that kind of thinking. Change the world, do things differently. Fight against the man. But I thought I am the man. Well, no, not really. Those people are out of power. They're the man. That kind of thinking comes in. And it just gradually, as it turns over, just like people who run the colleges and universities have turned over to become the same students that were having sit-ins in their administrative buildings in the 70s, are now running the universities. So, pretty soon, you realize that the messengers that you're supposed to rely on at least a little bit aren't doing anything like the job they're supposed to do. Now, we still have some decent methodologies of communication out there. I mean, there's the internet, which is not reliable, but at least gives you a lot of choices. And some of which you can kind of sort out yourself. This is what we call, and this is a strange word anymore in our country, a free will. So you can decide what you want to listen to and what you want to believe based on the information you have. That, of course, is a crime in some states now. Well, not states, some other countries. It's coming here probably. But that's what you're supposed to do. That by itself isn't enough, really, because we're inundated by that philosophy. And, we talked last time about how really the way to get votes now, if you're on the progressive left, is to just get some money, usually from other people, either they willfully do it to get you elected, and then you slide them some favors. This has been going on since, the time men sat around campfires and tried to decide who was going to be the leader of the tribe. This is nothing new. And then you also get it when you realize that you control the state. The state controls the money. And it not only controls the money, it controls collecting the money. And who has money? Well, right now, the citizens. And the vast bulk of the money that's necessary to run this country doesn't come from Silicon Valley. And that's a huge amount of money out there. And we probably have more people that are more distant in their wealth from the rest of everybody than we've ever had in history. I really feel like that. I mean, there are so many people in some of these industries now that are so rich, they really are approximations to, we just had a few kings, pashas, sultans, whatever, in the past. A bunch of them now. But it is not enough. If you look at where the money is at, even today, because of the numbers, the money exists in the middle part. The producers, the people that work for those companies, the people that buy their products, the people that try and buy a house, try and have a lifestyle that doesn't involve getting up in the morning and trying to think about what new jet you're going to buy for yourself. Because that's what the very top does. Some of them anyway. Some of them are more thoughtful. Let's not forget. But it's a pretty thin layer. I mean, if you want to know what's going on, just look at what's going on with, like, Jeff Bezos from Amazon. He sells millions of dollars worth of stock. He's already got billions and billions. I don't know what it is right now, but it's over 100. So what does he do with it? Well, he doesn't really have anything to do with it that changes his life very much, does it? I mean, when you get to a certain point, you have pretty much everything you want. So then what do? You got to start looking around for things that somehow, briefly, appeals to your ego, your taste, whatever the case might be. Now, this is the same sort of thing that happens in countries, nations, empires, when they become decadent. Same thing. Too much leisure, things going too easily. Pretty soon you start thinking about, how can I do some weird thing that I haven't done before, and will it make me happy? It's all the same. My example about the jet is, just recently Bezos took all that money, a bunch of money out of Amazon. Doesn't need to. He's got a huge amount of money already. What did he do with it? He bought a 4th personal jet. Okay. I can see that. Say you're someplace and you want to fly out on your personal jet. And that personal jet has to fly in from another spot to pick you up. That means you have to wait. Can you imagine being as important a person as some of these billionaires are? That you would have to wait for a little bit? No. You should have a personal jet everywhere you're at. That's how you'll spend your money. That's how you'll feel very special. Now, what's next after that? It can get pretty weird. That's what next after that. And I think most people know that. How do you get to that kind of strange place? Well, it's kind of a trip. Like I said, it's closing off your ability to see what's going on and sort of the results of what's happening with policy and what everybody else is doing. Funny when you live in a great big country that has all these means of communication, and you realize that you're only really finding out about things from 1 or 2 places. And they don't like the fact that there's another one that you can find something out about. They don't like that. They want to just be one if they could possibly do it that way. Or a variation on the one, call them different names. It's the same. Because when you do that, it's hard to get you riled up if you don't know what's going on. Eventually, it will affect you right in your own home. And then the tactic is what they did before Rush Limbaugh, who got on the radio and people started realizing that they weren't alone, that there were other people that thought like them, and that they had a voice. But one of the tactics is, when people start complaining, is to act like they're outliers. They're crazy. They don't know what's going on. They're, some kind of supremacists or something. They don't even know what that is. We have to alienate them. We have to put them in a different spot so that anything they say or do has no credibility. It won't last forever. It eventually builds up. It's like in our last program section in there where we're talking about, the kettle and the steam. Eventually, it blows off in some way. And there's 3 or 4 different ways it can probably blow off. None of them are healthy in the short term, and most of them are unhealthy in the long term. So what do they have to do now to make sure that this keeps going? Because now they're riding the tiger. I have a bumper here I played called, I got a tiger by the tail. That's the idea, is once you get on the tiger, you're riding it, and then it dawns on you, you can't get off. Because if you get off the tiger, that's it for you, mister, or Mrs., or Ms., or they. And that'll be the end of it. So you just got to keep trying to ride it, trying to stay on, and trying to do one crazy thing after another not to get thrown off. No matter what goes on in this sort of tiger analogy to your country or whatever the case may be, he's still here. He's still technically in charge. I mean, he's running everything from, from the beach, asleep, or wherever he's at any given moment. But nevertheless, he's still in charge. She is not an incumbent. She's been reinvented as a fresh face in the political spectrum. She's never ran for president before. She's never been vice president. If you think that, well, yeah, he probably has some dim memories of that, but that is not important. And so it's fascinating to see them recreate something, build it up, and then not let anybody get close enough to see that it's made out of tissue paper. So she's been entirely made as a happy, fresh face, as Hansen says. She's all about the joy and the vibe. She has nothing to do with the last 3.5 years of the presidency of Biden and Harris. Nothing. And she could not have, since she had nothing to do with it, could not have enacted any new legislation or had any ideas. Oh, okay. Well, so let's say, the vice president isn't the most decisive job. Well, yeah, it is. You know where it's decisive? In the Senate. When you have a Senate that's divided 50-50, the vice president casts the deciding vote. And she's cast a deciding vote on all of these reckless, crazy kinds of things, including the Inflation Reduction Act, which is just the most misnamed thing, one of the most misnamed things in the history of, I think, our country. And so she's the one that enables all of these. She casts the deciding vote. Nobody asks her about that. She's now a moderate. As a matter of fact, she's a little bit more than a moderate. She is now adopting some of Donald Trump's policies. I mean, she didn't say that, but it comes across like that. And so you just float that out there. Now, do you say it yourself? Not really, because if you say it yourself, people can ask you questions, maybe, and you can't answer them because you go off track instantly when asked questions, and you don't prepare, and you just don't have it when it comes to extemporaneous speaking or thinking or probably anything else like that. So how do you fix that? Well, you just don't let anybody talk to you. In scripted interviews, none of these stop by on the way to the helicopter and chat with people. No, that isn't going to happen. And if you offer any concrete policy by accident, that's a mistake. Because you're about the vibe. You're about happy, happy, joy, joy. You're not about, boring concrete things. The fact that she's talked about this price control deal, which of course includes wages, has been a bad thing for her. She shouldn't even have said that. Of course, she has quite a record of saying it in the past, but a lot of people don't know that. And of course, they don't know that because the places they go to get what we call news don't talk about it. And then when she's out campaigning, no one's allowed to talk to her, to ask her about it. So you spend most of your time talking about Donald Trump. Because what you really want is just some vague idea of Kamala Harris as the happy, happy, joy, joy candidate who's just appeared out of thin air to save the country. It wasn't around for the last 3.5 years, 4 years. Wasn't her. Now, the real election is Trump versus Trump. This is what they really want to do. They want to try and just have Trump, the name you see on the ballot, and then so blacken that name to voters that they'll vote for someone else. Who would you vote for? Well, I guess the other person, the happy, happy, joy, joy candidate. They're not Trump. So Kamala, in many ways, is just a not Trump candidate. They're just trying to make her as toothless as possible so that there's no problems there. And as you watch this, it's pretty fascinating. It's become more and more obvious what they're doing. And folks, you're the only thin line of defense against that. We used to talk about the thin blue line. That's you now. You're just a thin line of the voting out there between all this stuff. If you don't get energized and show up and get everybody else to show up, there's not going to be a line at all.
Thanks for listening. Listen, if you'd like to listen to more and you want to maybe perhaps have someone else listen to our podcast, you can do so either by going right to our webpage, politicalviking.com, or therickwagnershow.com. Both of them take you there. You can get links right directly to our podcast, or you can hear our podcast on Podbean, on iTunes, and Spotify, and a couple others. So you can find us. We appreciate it if you do. And if you've heard the show, you want somebody else to hear it, that's a good way to send it to them. Thanks for listening.